Please welcome to the stage our moderator, Christy McDonald, anchor MiWeek, and our panel members, Albert Berriz, Chief Executive Officer McKinley, and Barry Broome, President and CEO, Greater Sacramento Area Economic Council.
Morning. Yeah, there we go. Oh, and that sounds a little deeper. Good morning to all of you. My name is Christy McDonald. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be a moderator here at the CEO Summit, and I trust you all had a safe journey in here as the wind blew you into the book Cadillac this morning. I think we're going to have a very dynamic panel here because we're going to highlight how differently Michigan is viewed by people and by businesses who are most poised to make investment in our state and help boost our economy. And it's going to be a very frank discussion. There's not going to be any sugarcoating here. So we want everyone to pay attention because from what I understand from these two gentlemen, they have a lot to say and they come from a very diverse background. As you heard that Doug introducing them, they come from different perspectives that I think is going to enlighten all of us here this morning because our discussion is really going to highlight how Michigan can be more competitive for business investment, for good paying jobs, and where we maybe need to improve ourselves a little bit so we can have the vibrant economy that we all want so much here in Michigan. So both of these gentlemen are going to start us off this morning with some opening remarks before we get into the Q&A session here this morning. So for our first speaker, Barry, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Here or up there?
Wherever you feel comfortable.
I will sit right. Will we go up there? Okay, perfect. Sabrina's telling me what to do. I'm used to this, so
we take direction from the floor.
Yeah, I come back to Michigan. What do I do now, right? Sabrina tells you. Okay, well, first off, let me say how happy I am to be here and how much I love Michigan and how impressive I think Doug's leadership's been with this organization. I congratulate all of you for fighting the good fight. I know it was obviously, I was here from 98 to 2005 in Kalamazoo, founding Southwest Michigan First with Bill Parfit, who I know has been a very active leader in the state. And so came out of Cleveland and Toledo, so I definitely come from the school of brass knuckles. And fighting for your economy when everything's working against you is tough to do, and it takes a certain amount of grit. And I think one of the things that you can always count on from Michigan leaders is courage and grit. But courage and grit will keep you on your feet. It won't necessarily help you turn the corner or get back to where you want to be as a state or as a Detroit region or any of the regions in Michigan. And so I thought, one of the perspectives I wanted to give, I was in Phoenix 10 years. I've been in California under 1 year. And of course, give you a little bit of a perspective from a Mountain West and a Western state on what Michigan looks like to people, what the conversations are about Michigan. And I think currently one of the good news, the feedback I get from people is Michigan's on an upswing. I mean, if you ever bring up Michigan 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whether you're anywhere out west, you were really talking about Death Valley in people's minds and eyes. I mean, it was really considered a complete failed institution. That's not the feedback that's given to me now. And I think specifically, some of the known achievements of simplifying your tax code, eliminating the personal real estate tax over time, the corporate income tax rate to 6%, the right to work state movement. So some of these policy achievements are sending the right message. The right to work state, when I came to Phoenix, people would say, how come Michigan's not a right to work state? And I used to say, because in the winter when we start our cars, it's too cold to look underneath them before we start it. But that was a joke for you guys that have never been around organized labor before. But but now you're starting to chip away at this notion that Michigan's an institution that's controlled by special interest group, or it's an old institution that's trapped in some of the old philosophies of big business and big labor. I think one of the other really important achievements that are going on here, as well as the recent effort to raise educational standards. So, people, the low-cost model, your cost has to be affordable, but it's really about a value proposition. And, the most common value proposition that employers are looking at today is your percentage of workforce that are millennials and what percentage of your workforce is highly educated. So if you look, and I've had this debate in Phoenix, which was a cost management community with a very conservative and libertarian policymakers. The state of Arizona, if you want to compete in cost, you're on the border with Mexico, good luck. You're going to have to go really, the average household income in Mexico was $10,000, and I think people in Phoenix wanted to do better than that. So if you couldn't create the ability to produce a workforce that was dynamic and solutions-based, you were going to be in trouble. And I want to talk a little bit about workforces of the future versus workforces of the past. And I think, some of the work that Michigan's been doing to model career technical education along the lines with Germany and European communities is really important. But it's also important to understand what the philosophy is of workforce. So I'll give you one of my just brief experiences of working in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. And I heard Governor Snyder make this presentation at the Michigan Ambassadors Dinner, which I got the privilege of being part of, and talking about, this stable, conscientious workforce that exists in Michigan. But, that's not what employers are looking for. Employers are looking for disruptive workforces. And, as I worked in San Francisco and San Jose, I mean, the 2 years in and out talent pool of the young professionals in that market isn't a problem that they're managing. They actually see that as an opportunity. The fact that the fact that the Googles and the Apples and the Yahoos are turning over their coders and their software engineers every 2 or 3 years and overpaying for them, they think that's the definition of the most talented people in that space. So if you're being interviewed by Apple, or if you're being interviewed by, Uber or Twitter, and you're a coder, and you tell that person interviewing you that, I'd like to be with this company 10 years, they don't hire you because they don't think you're dynamic enough. They're looking for someone that is going to be so curious about technology, be so aspirational innovation, they couldn't possibly stay with you more than 2 or 3 or 4 years. And I think that is a really tough mental cultural shift for all Midwest communities to get to, that this millennial workforce that's breaking new ground all the time in technology is a workforce that radically moves physically, which is an opportunity for Detroit, but it also radically moves intellectually, and it's not the 30-year General Motor brass ring workforce of our generation. I think the fact that you're benchmarking yourselves consistently is really important, and I think that you're having honest conversations about your economic position, and I think people should be optimistic. I mean, Michigan has something that's going to become more and more important over the next decade. You have water. If you don't think there's a water problem, I was in California within 3 months. I felt guilty when I had a 4-minute shower. I'd actually go to confession. That was a whole new thing. You don't really get very many Hail Marys or Our Fathers for a 5-minute shower. So that's the good news. So, water is a real problem in California. I mean, California is legitimately running out of water. It really is. And so, consequently, Arizona pumps its water in through the Colorado River. There's no natural water in Arizona. It's a state that's going to go to 16 million people. Then, of course, it's becoming a worldwide problem. So, I think these are some inherent advantages. And I'm going to just go over quickly some of the things I think that need to be done much better. I don't think Michigan owns the automotive space any longer. And I don't think the state can afford not to. And what I mean by that is all things automotive. I don't know if you're probably familiar with Elon Musk at Tesla. He wanted to start his business in Detroit. Okay, and he even tells the story about people in Detroit wouldn't pay attention to his company because it was an alternative electric car, and he wasn't, taken seriously in Detroit even after he built PayPal. I don't know if that's true or not, or if that was just a favorite thing to take a shot at Detroit. I believe it's actually in his book that he wanted to build Tesla in Detroit. Imagine the conversation. I mean, I got my Shinola watch. Imagine if we were all driving Teslas. But, I know exactly what probably happened because I did the same thing when I was a Michigan economic developer. I mean, I didn't even really, to be honest with you, and when I was in Ohio, in Toledo, I did the Chrysler Jeep project. I probably wouldn't have really taken a phone call from Toyota, back in the 90s. Because, I was a GM guy, I was a Ford guy, I was a Chrysler guy, I was a UAW guy. I had the UAW guys on one side, and I had the big three on the other. And I probably wouldn't have worked that hard to do a big Japanese deal. I kind of felt like maybe I would have betrayed them. But over time, what happened, Tennessee and Alabama was more than happy to take in these new car makers. And they were more than happy to take in the Korean car makers, which I thought was going to be the next Yugo. So don't bring me up here to forecast in the automotive industry. And Tennessee and Alabama built out these great engineering bases and these great automotive bases. And they're working with car companies that have much healthier balance sheets than the big three, which I guess technically doesn't even exist anymore. Maybe it's the big 2.5. So I think owning this automotive space, I was flying here with a guy from Silicon Valley, from San Jose, and I was like, what do you do? He said, well, I build these software packages that helps, trucks be driverless, and my software package can now drive 2 trucks at the same time, so I can help a company drive 2 trucks at the same time without anybody in it, and if the truck safety is, they want them 1,000 feet or 100 feet or 200 feet, I can actually drive the trucks with the right amount of space in between it. He's got his PhD from Stanford. And I said, who are you working with? And he started rattling off every company in the industry, not just Ford, not just Chrysler, not just General Motors, but he's working with the Germans, the Japanese companies, and all the different people. Denso, he has a partnership with. I wasn't under an NDA, so I won't mention his name. But that's the kind of thinking that's going on in a place like Silicon Valley. And that's the kind of thinking that Michigan, no one knows cars like Michigan. So one time when I was in Kalamazoo and things were very desperate, we'd lost a General Motors plant, closed all of our paper plants. Pharmacy Upjohn moved its headquarters to New Jersey. It was very, very dark in Kalamazoo when I got there, and Southwest Michigan First was the formation to deal with this. And I sat in a room full of people, probably like this. I said, raise your hand if you've ever run a manufacturing plant. And half the people raised their hand. And I was like, do you know how hard it is to run a manufacturing plant? There's no one in this room that thinks running a plant's a big deal. There's probably a lot of people. How many people you think raise their hand in Phoenix when you ask them if they ran a manufacturing plant? In a room like this, there might be 2 guys, might be 3. They probably didn't run a manufacturing plant anywhere near on the standards that's here. So I think Michigan skills, know-how, and I even think the entrepreneurial communities in Michigan can match California or any other market, but it's the culture and the mindset that's holding Michigan back and holding other places back in the Midwest. So I think one of the things that I would also suggest that we have to do a lot better is looking towards the future, not the past. So, Cleveland is where I spent most of my life. It's a community that looks into the past. Some communities have looked into the past long enough, like Youngstown, Ohio, that they never came close to developing a future again. I mean, imagine in Flint, there's still people sitting around talking about Roger and me, right? So looking in the past is a big mistake. It's not coming back, and you shouldn't be afraid of that because I think the future's within the grasp of Detroit, and it's within the grasp of Michigan. But, when I was in Kalamazoo, hanging on the Upjohn, Doug Rothwell helped me a lot. One of the things, I usually get fired about 16 times a year in my job, but one of the things I did very early on, I did a speech in Kalamazoo, and I said, this R&D center in downtown Kalamazoo is going to leave, and we need to get prepared to do that. It was 85% of the downtown tax base, and if you've been to Kalamazoo, it's got a beautiful downtown, and they're very proud of it. And, of course, anything and everything in that part of the state started with W.E. Upjohn, but it was going to go. Doug had retained Battelle, put a report out that it was under threat. Ann Arbor was under threat, and we sold the under threat model, ended up creating the Southwest Michigan Innovation Center, and really was ready when Pfizer acquired Pharmacia. So when Pfizer acquired Pharmacia, Mary Sue Coleman thought that was good news for Ann Arbor. So did Jennifer Granholm, thinking it was good news for Michigan. But we were prepared that it wasn't going to be good news for Kalamazoo, and we had a strategy moving forward. And I think there's still 4,000 jobs from Pfizer in that community, and I think part of our preparation was we were moving on from that dream to a bigger dream, and I know it's a dream that they still have of building a biotech corridor and a biotech future. But I'll give you what I ended up doing in Kalamazoo, and I think Detroit and Michigan can do the same. So I'm looking at Kalamazoo, and it's completely fallen apart. Stamping plant's gone on Comstock, 4,500 jobs. Supply chains matriculating out of the state into Indiana, the South, China, Mexico. And I'm like, how do you build an economy from nothing? Western Michigan University, nice middle-level state university, but it wasn't U of M. We didn't really even have an airport, And so, it's kind of like being a horse whisperer. But if you looked at the history, and the reason we did the life science strategy in Kalamazoo is it's what it always was. Kalamazoo, Michigan's a place where doctors and chemists build companies and become billionaires. So, that's their business model. W. Upjohn was a doctor, built a company out of chemistry and became a billionaire, and Homer Stryker was a doctor, and he built a medical device company, and they all became billionaires. Biomet was actually started in Kalamazoo and financially backed by Kalamazoo families. They moved to Indiana. They all became billionaires. So I was like, I think I know exactly what we're supposed to be doing around here. We're supposed to be building companies around science and technology and making billionaires. And, they're actually, that center is still pretty successful today. So what does Detroit do? Well, let's talk real quick about Detroit. I mean, Detroit is the greatest economic powerhouse in the history of the civilized world. I wasn't around for Rome, but I'm around San Francisco and San Jose. Those two communities right now are not the economic force that Detroit was in its heyday. You cannot walk into a place and find a job and buy a home and have a life and have your kids walk to good schools. That cannot happen in San Jose, and it doesn't happen in San Francisco today. So Detroit was this economic powerhouse, and one of the things that made Detroit an economic powerhouse is it was an open community. It was not a community that was practicing racial segregation and division in the 40s and 50s like the South. And so, African-American people and other people drove into the community and found a home in Detroit. And the car makers found ongoing talent. It was a place of new ideas. It was a place of invention. It was a place of disruptive thinking. It was a place of forward activity. And it was a place for young people. And I really do think Detroit has a great story for millennials today. And then last but not least, one of the things that I think has to happen in Michigan and Detroit is the one thing I learned in Arizona is 40 to 60% of Greater Phoenix's workforce is a non-documented immigrant. 40 to 60%. And that place is booming right now. And I will tell you, the number one individual asking for a driver's license in California right now is a non-documented working immigrant. That is the number one person getting a driver's license in California. Immigrants are economic powerhouse. All immigrants. Any immigrants. Thank you. And an immigrant can get a house for $5,000 in Detroit. And you know what? That's powerful. So, immigrants can find homes in Detroit. They can build businesses in Detroit. They can get jobs in Detroit. You can get space for 50 cents a square foot. All those things that seem to be, an economic disadvantage for Detroit, in the hands and the minds of an immigrant, is real opportunity. And I hope that you'll take a page from Arizona and some of these other places and do just the opposite. I hope Michigan policy favors immigrants, seeks immigrants, and when Michigan and Detroit become the place for immigrants, believe it or not, that's when you'll really be on your way back. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Barry. Albert, you're up.
Oops. So my conversation is about Florida. So as an immigrant, Barry, I totally agree with everything you're about to say. So good morning. As you've heard, I'm CEO of McKinley. We're a real estate investment company that owns and operates real estate, a portfolio of $4.6 billion over 33 states. We have an extraordinary team of people of 1,600 people, and we operate 55 million square feet of multifamily, commercial, and retail. I've been asked to talk about Florida, but I want you to know that McKinley is born and raised in Michigan. We're Michigan made, and we're fiercely committed to Michigan now and forever. But today, as a member of Business Leaders for Michigan, I've been asked to show you about the competitive landscape that's out there to attract capital from companies like ours. And what I want you to know that it's not competitive, It's a nuclear arms race, and all of them want to put you out of business. They are consumed with growth, they want growth, and they're passionate about cohesion, and they will do everything to take your business. And when they do that, they will fuel a level of growth which I will discuss today that you have never seen before in many of the other states across the country. So here we go. So why Florida? The first thing I notice when I get off the plane in Florida is that I can't tell who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. I can't tell who's liberal or who's conservative. But here is what is palpable and overwhelmingly obvious. They want our money and they want our business. We operate in 3 cities in Florida, so that has us working with 2 Democrats as mayors and 1 Republican, and 1 Republican as governor. Listen, if you pick up this morning's Orlando Sentinel, Miami Herald, or Tampa Bay Times, these guys have very real differences. But here's what I can tell you. When it comes to economic development, when it comes to jobs, 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 when it comes to growing the income of the people that are living in their state, they are shoulder to shoulder, side by side. They are there to get business. They are there to steal your business, and these guys are fiercely competitive. So something to think about when I do business in Michigan. What I see is lots of differences. I don't see that same cohesion. I don't know that every single person who's waking up in Michigan this morning is consumed and obsessed with jobs and raising the income of the people that are living in this state. And here we have my good friend, Buddy Dyer, who is the mayor of Orlando. He's a Democrat, full disclosure. And he's here to talk to you this morning about $10 billion of public and private infrastructure investment that's going into the city beautiful today. So what's true about the political leadership in Florida is they understand the public finance markets. And they understand that growth generates growth. They understand that simple equation that the engine for growth is in fact growth. And they also understand that if they lay some basic groundwork, private capital will follow, and then they get out of the way. Florida has spent 30 years building its toll road system, and here is a number that you'll be interesting to hear. This morning, they have $1.2 billion of annual revenue that is unused, untapped, that can be bonded, that can be capitalized to build infrastructure way into the future. So here's what I tell people as a taxpayer of Florida. We're going to welcome 100 million visitors this year to Florida. If you go to the Orlando airport, your Hertz rental car or your national rental car is going to have a fast pass monitor on it. When you go through the tolls at 55 miles an hour, you are paying for our roads. Because the majority of the people who are using the roads today in Florida are those 100 million visitors who are visiting the roads today. And by the way, there's 100 million visitors visiting Florida today, and in Buddy's community, there are 62 million visitors that will visit Orlando, and there are 52 million visitors that will visit one GPS coordinate on the planet, and it's called Walt Disney. So, candidly, as a Florida taxpayer, I thank you for your contribution in helping us pay our roads. To put some numbers in perspective, what that does in terms of fueling growth, the CapEx budget over the next 10 years to upgrade Interstate 4 from downtown Orlando to downtown Tampa is $10 billion. If you haven't been to downtown Tampa or downtown Orlando, you should go. They're tearing them down, and they're building them back up again. And by the way, what's going to pay for those roads are the fast pass lanes on the center that you can take on the way to work or on the way to visit Harry Potter or Darth Vader this afternoon. So maybe in Michigan, we need to think about the intersection of growth and infrastructure if we really want to become a top 10 state. And here we have our good friends at Fortress, who are building a privately financed high-speed train from Miami to Orlando, $1.6 billion of their money, running on the railroads built by Henry Flagler in 1892, also privately owned. And here we have someone who we love. I know there are a lot of Red Wings fans in the audience, but Jeff Vinik, the owner of the Tampa Bay Lightning, is an example of private capital doing great things in a city. He is being backed by a Bill Gates investment entity in his first phase investment of private investment to fuel a private real estate growth in the downtown is $1 billion. The total plan is $2 billion. And I want to say something about Michigan, which is really important as it relates to Orlando and Tampa. As a Michigander, I am very proud that the centerpiece of Orlando is a $500 million investment known as Amway Arena. So when you fly into Orlando and you're a Michigander, I can tell you what, you're going to be real proud because the biggest sign you'll see in the downtown is Amway Arena. And by the way, I have to thank you again, because if you've been to our Magic Kingdom recently, your hotel motel tax helped us finance part of that $500 million, about $100 million worth, and we thank you for your contribution. Folks, Floridians have figured this out. Here is an amazing statistic. The state is growing at a rate of 820 new residents per day. I'll repeat that number, 820 new residents per day. And what's fueling that growth is infrastructure. All of our bankers in the audience have seen us present this slide before, and this is our McKinley Interstate 4 corridor slide. And so like a lot of these other companies that I've been talking about this morning, we are all in and fully invested in Florida. We are the largest owner of apartments in the I-4 corridor, which is the 6th largest population concentration in the country today. And we're proud to be there. And it is an extraordinary place to see, and it is an extraordinary place of growth. So here is Michigan's turnaround plan. If you haven't been to it, please go to michiganturnaroundplan.com. Go to it today. If you haven't read it thoroughly, you should. It's an extraordinary document. It's a fact-based document. It's a growth-based document. It's what we should be doing. We've implemented many of these things in Michigan. We should be implementing all of these things in Michigan. And by the way, we need to talk less, and we need to win more. So Doug and Sabrina wanted me to talk about what a top 10 state looks like. Well, here you go. This is Florida. They are absolutely top 10 everything. So the business case for Florida isn't why Florida. The business case has to be why not Florida. It's the 4th largest economy of any state, and it's the 18th largest economy when measured as a country in the world today. We, here in Michigan, need to develop the same type of compelling arguments so capital comes to us like it's going to Florida. And if my presentation wasn't compelling enough this morning, my granddaughter asked me to show you her version of why Florida, which is up on the screen there today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Albert. We cannot compete with Minnie Mouse, but we're going to try here this morning and see what we can do. Gentlemen, I want to start off first with both of you with a little bit of perception and then a little bit of comparison. So, Barry, let me start off with you first. What is your take on Michigan's comeback? And we know that we've made progress. We know that there is a lot more to go. But what also do you see as the biggest differences in what Michigan is doing and what some other certain states are doing?
Well, I think probably the highlight of Michigan's comeback is the conversation around Detroit. I think there's a lot of really strong national conversation around Detroit. But one of the things that I think Michigan did, and it might have been out of the fiscal conversation, is they kind of got out of the economic development business as a state. I mean, you know, when I talked about Kalamazoo and the success story there, and, you know, if Pfizer would have pulled all those jobs out of Kalamazoo, there wouldn't be a Kalamazoo today. The Grand Rapids work, right place deserves a credit. But, you know, that whole western corridor in Michigan was fueled by the leverage of Doug Rothwell's leadership and John Engler's leadership at Michigan Economic Development Corporation. We would have died. I mean, we had Doug in the room with Pfizer. We got tax credits. We put a $750 million incentive program to Pfizer. So we had support. We weren't off on our own. And with MEDC, you know, being cut all the time and the programs being cut all the time, all your local communities are disconnected from each other because they can't join themselves around a single strategy, and you can't get alignment in your state. So if you look at the states that are great, I mean, Texas is great, Utah is great. They have incredible state economic development organizations that align their entire communities around single strategies. And they treat their regions as separate markets inside the state that have certain competencies. I mean, even New York's doing that under Como, you know, where they're, Como put $1 billion into a Buffalo strategy. So I think I'm shocked that Michigan has allowed MEDC to drift away, especially with the success of its track record.
And I do want to talk about the up and down investment or disinvestment in the MEDC in the state, but I do want to get from you, Albert, perceptions of Michigan on a whole when you're doing business across the country. When you say you're from Michigan, you're headquartered in Michigan. What is the reaction to that, and how does it differ now in 2015 than it did maybe 5 years ago?
You know, I'll be honest, the conversation's not about Michigan. It's about Detroit. Detroit is the single best public relations effort this state has seen in decades. Mm-hmm. When I get off in Miami, when I get off in New York, when I get off in Tampa, the first question I get is, what are the Illiches doing with the new arena in the downtown? What is Dan Gilbert doing as real estate? I'm sitting in Miami, they're showing me their Shinola watch. It's terrific. The interesting thing about Detroit is it's not just an inspirational story, but it's an aspirational story. And it has been the game changer, in my opinion. It has put us on the map, and we weren't on the map. It's a totally different dialogue.
So do you believe that the narrative has then caught up to where we actually are right now? Because I find that sometimes you go around the country, and the perception lags behind where we actually are right now. They'll say, oh, aren't you doing, and it was something that was happening about a year or two ago. Do you find that now everyone is up to speed with actually what we're doing? The news is getting out?
Oh, it's getting out. Listen, I just had a bankers event at the DAC just a few weeks ago, and I asked where everybody was, why they were late, and they were all buying Shinola watches. I mean, they get it. I mean, they want to be here. They understand what's going on. Wall Street gets it. I mean, I think it's terrific. I mean, certainly we haven't seen the funds flow that, like I was talking about relative to Florida, but it's a great story. People want opportunity. Opportunity is a key word in business, and Detroit is about opportunity. And I think the vibe is just terrific.
All right, it's a good vibe, but now we have to take it to the next level, Barry, because we actually have to get people to come in here with their companies, invest in the state, beyond saying, oh, there's a great story happening in Detroit. People now have to say, I'm going to put my money either in Detroit or in the greater state of Michigan.
Yeah, I think, first off, I bought my Shinola in Los Angeles, just so you know. So I was in LA, and I saw this Made in Detroit box in a store, and I walked in, and the woman behind the counter was actually from Michigan, and so I bought the watch, and it was emotional, really, for me to buy it. And so I think to get companies to come here, you got to provide a value proposition for them. So you kind of have gotten out of your way, but when you were listening to Albert, he was saying 825 people move a day to Florida. Florida's an immigrant state. Texas, it's an immigrant state. California, it's an immigrant state. Phoenix is an immigrant community. And you know what you can't overcome, you cannot overcome declining population trends and aging population trends. You can't overcome it. You got to keep your young people, you got to keep your graduates. Obviously, they need jobs. And you've got to have an infusion of people outside of Michigan moving here, and employers are going to look for those population trends, and they're going to look for those population trends, especially in the millennial workforce, before they select communities of the future.
Albert, I want to talk a little bit about consistency in support of economic development and the fact that we've had a bit of a spotty track record here in Michigan. How important do you view that consistency in funding for economic development in our state?
It's a great question. Let me just follow up on the immigrant question if I can. So just because I want to verify his comment with numbers. So out of the 820 people moving to Florida today, 3 out of 5 are moving to the I-4 corridor. That's Orlando to Tampa. 75% of the 3 out of 5 are immigrants. If you don't think that economy is fueled by immigrants, we'll fly in Governor Scott right now, and he will tell you the first 3 words out of his mouth are immigrant, immigrant, immigrant. It's not just what they're doing, it's the enthusiasm, it's the aspirational view. They're working hard, they work 18 hours a day. They're terrific for an economy. To your question, you know, every single governor or every single mayor that I work with in Florida, their economic development executive is next door to the mayor's office. They're the most important executive in the mayor's office. They're the ones they always have with them in every meeting. And in Florida, if you look at Governor Scott's organization, he's glad that other states are shutting down their economic development organizations. He's very happy to take all your business. He has world-class executives running that business, and Barry knows who they are. They're not good, they're terrific, and they're not here all the time because they're all the way around the world. If you look at the number of flights that fly in from the United Arab Emirates to the Orlando International Airport, you'll understand why Rick Scott's doing a good job with economic development.
Yeah, fools are shutting down their state agencies.
It's
fools. They're fools.
So what do you think can be improved in Michigan to change our reputation then, Barry?
Well, I actually think, you know, when you were talking about the awareness, I do love the Pure Michigan campaign, and I think the consistency behind that has been very helpful. I think Detroit is probably overperforming reputation-wise outside of the state, and Michigan is underperforming. You know, I think Michigan should learn from Ohio's mistakes. I mean, under Bob Taft, Ohio restructured all their business policies. Ohio's done, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, did many of the things that recently happened in Michigan, but it's never been converted into a selling and marketing strategy for that state. And I think getting the improved business climate has to be a real story. But again, if your state agency, MEDC, is getting cut by 25%, none of those achievements that you have are getting out into the marketplace because you don't have a team of people working on it.
Well, it all comes down to money. And if you're looking at the legislature, then how do you impress upon our state legislators that that's where we need to start spending the money? And how do you take that larger message to the state of Michigan and people who are saying, well, we seem to be doing okay for where we are right now. For Michigan, we're doing all right. How then do you, you energize them to understand that maybe there needs to be more investment at that level?
Well, it's a return-driven exercise, right? So when people talk about tax credits, I always tell you, if your tax credit program is not costing you money, your tax credit programs, if they're written properly, and Michigan was very good at economic policy, is driving income to your state as well. And so if you're, you know, the tax credits, what happens is budgetary people measure these programs statically, not dynamically, and they don't understand how to communicate those fiscally. So you get this very conservative mindset on the budgetary side. It zeroes out everything as a cost item. You know, there's no conversation about dynamic modeling on how many more jobs and investment occur because of the tax credit program. And so it gets treated as a fiscal note and a fiscal hit in the budget. But that is not the case. And there needs to be a conversation with the people advising the legislature on the budget that tax credits, you know, R&D tax credits give huge returns to a state when you have them in place.
You know, Albert, as a CEO, you're the one that gets to make decisions about where you want to locate your business and where you want to do business. So what attributes, I guess, would attract you to doing business in a certain state? And a lot of times we do talk about tax rates and regulations and business costs, but are there any kind of soft factors that would attract you to a state?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, quite frankly, the soft factors are the final decision maker because the hard factors are always made for me because obviously we're not going to places that have negative growth. And so, you know, I always look at it as what I call, and I talk about it in our office as the 3 C's. And for me, I'm a real estate investor, so I've got to follow my instincts. So my three C's are, am I comfortable in a market that I'm investing in? And do I have great chemistry with the people that I do business with in those markets and in those states? And if I'm really comfortable with those markets, and I have great chemistry, then we go all out and we invest with conviction. And we can move a lot of resources, we can move a lot of money, we can move a lot of people, and we can make things happen. And so for me, once I gain that comfort and once I gain that chemistry, we're all in.
Barry, I want to talk a little bit about incentives before our time is up here, and which are key when businesses are making decisions about where they want to be. And we just saw that South Carolina got $200 million incentives to get Volvo to land there. What is your view on the importance of incentives, and is Michigan doing enough?
Well, they're really important. And what incentives do, so Michigan's been raising educational standards, leveling off its corporate income at 6, eliminating the taxes on personal property, changing its brand. And then, that sets the stage for you to be advantaged. And now when companies make evaluations, there's an investment decision. And what incentives do is they help a company get a return on the investment itself. So if I want to come into Michigan and take advantage of these achievements, if I want to connect to, University of Michigan's engineering capabilities, I now have a project that I have to finance and put into the ground. And my ability to offset those costs on that project are an important part of the return equation. So if you don't have incentives, you end up improving competitively, and then you zero out on the equation of the project, and the Volvo plant goes to South Carolina, or Tesla stays in California or Reno instead of being in Detroit.
Albert, we talked a lot about business leaders from Michigan plan to make Michigan a top 10 state, and really in calling for investments in job training, higher education, and infrastructure. And you talked a lot about what Florida's doing in terms of infrastructure. Are those the top 3 things that we should be focusing right now in Michigan?
I want to just, before I say that, answer your question, I want to talk about a follow-up to what Barry said. I think we really need to be very focused on where we're going in Michigan and not get too comfortable with where we're at. And if you look at the long-term economic forecast that we publish as business leaders, it's flat. And so my message to people, because I talk about this all the time, and if I'm talking, what I say to people is I'm talking to 55-year-old grandmother in Macomb County. My message to you is you don't want flat. Your kids and your grandkids are moving to North Carolina, they're moving to Florida, and they're moving to Texas with flat. We can't have flat. So to your point, the 3 things that I always talk about is what I call the I-4 corridor chemistry, and it works. Number 1 is immigrants. You can't grow an economy today in the United States of America without a huge inflow of immigration. You just can't do it. It's palpable in California, it's palpable in Texas, and it certainly is palpable in Florida. Number 2, you've got to connect educations to careers and jobs. I'll give you one small example. There's a school in Winter Park, Florida called Full Sail University, 6,500 kids. Every major entertainment company is sitting and waiting for those kids to graduate from 2 years. They're running every single major entertainment company today. They're working for ESPN, they're working for ABC, they're working for Disney, they're working for all of those companies. And we may be able to get those kids in 2 years and have them be a Foley artist, or running a movie like what they're doing at Disney. And I think those things are very critical for us, and we need to be doing more of that. And then on the infrastructure, I don't want to be repetitive, but I'll just give you my one final example. On my numbers of 62 million visitors to Orlando, we greeted 40 million visitors at the Orlando International Airport. We right now have in the ground a phase 2 that will be done by January 2017. Our capacity in the airport will go from 40 million to 80 million. And so if you don't think that's important, right behind that, Comcast NBC Universal is currently doubling the size of their investment in Orlando, and Disney is figuring out how to take their 28,000 acres and make their 52 million visitors 104 million.
In the last minute that we have, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you both the same question and kind of leave us with this note. What can the people in this room right now take out of here to help make Michigan a top 10 state? What would your advice be for people in this room?
Well, first off, stay positive. There's always Sunbelt states that are going to have advantages because of weather and things you can't control. But, you can control your attitude and your approach, to the state's economy. And don't be satisfied with good enough. Michigan could be doing a lot better, should be doing a lot better. The opportunity is huge for Michigan with water and affordability and great schools, but you got to tell your story. And as a community, you have to push your policymakers. I love Rick Snyder, but if he's supporting budgets that are cutting the MEDC, even though he's our friend and he's done a great job as governor, don't let him off the hook for that. Push him to do more.
Albert, you get the last word.
Cohesion. That's it.
I like that. It's like plastic.
Well, that was the last word. Barry Broome, Albert Berriz, thank you so much for being with us here this morning, and thank you for your attention.